Rachel Reeves is facing a political firestorm as her new inheritance tax plan, now widely known as the family farm tax, promises to impose devastating financial burdens on British family farms. This contentious policy targets agricultural properties valued over £1 million, removing long-standing tax exemptions and saddling family farms with a 20% inheritance tax. Many rural families argue that Labour's reforms misunderstand the financial realities of farming, forcing them to sell off land or even shut down altogether to meet these new tax obligations. Reeves, however, is standing firm. Labour claims the reforms are needed to fund public services, arguing that only the wealthiest estates will be impacted. Yet farmers and rural MPs have rallied against this portrayal, warning that it endangers the UK's food security and threatens to dismantle farming traditions passed down for generations. The backlash is gaining momentum, with Harriet Cross, MP for Gordon and Buchan, leading a coalition of Conservative MPs and farming associations in a fierce campaign against Labour's changes. Earlier this week, Cross and a group of rural MPs delivered a scathing letter to Downing Street demanding an immediate reversal of the policy. Signed by over 100 MPs, lords and agricultural groups, the letter warns that the inheritance tax changes present serious and potentially devastating challenges to family farms across the UK. Outside Downing Street, Cross didn't hold back. This policy isn't just poorly timed, it's fundamentally wrong. Family farms are unique. They are the foundation of rural life, safeguarding our food security, employment and countryside. Labour is forcing these families to choose between selling their land, their equipment, or their future. Cross criticised Labour's framing of the reforms as affecting only the wealthy, explaining that family farms, though valued highly due to land, are asset-rich but cash-poor. The outcry from the farming community is palpable. Across the UK, family farmers say the new policy will severely affect their ability to pass down their farms, an essential part of their legacy. John Hargreaves, a third-generation farmer from Lincolnshire, explained that his family farm, valued just over £1 million, now faces a tax bill that could force them to sell off vital assets. "Our farm isn't a typical business. It's our home and our heritage," Hargreaves said. "This isn't just a tax, it's a death sentence for family farms." Hargreaves echoed the sentiments of many, pointing out that Labour's focus on the wealthiest estates fails to understand the structure of family farms. "We don't have millions sitting in the bank," he said. "Every pound goes back into the farm, to livestock, feed, repairs. Labour is completely disconnected from our reality." Conservative MPs from rural constituencies are throwing their full weight behind calls to reverse Labour's inheritance tax reforms. Joining Cross, MPs like Afra Brandreth have condemned the tax policy as a threat to rural Britain. Brandreth, who represents Chester South and Eddisbury, joined Cross in delivering the letter to Number 10, describing the inheritance tax changes as a fundamental attack on the farming community. "It's a betrayal of British agriculture," Brandreth argued. "We're talking about the potential collapse of local economies and food production. This isn't just about a single tax. It's about the future of our countryside and our way of life." According to Brandreth, Labour's policy could wipe out smaller family farms that form the backbone of the UK's food supply chain, making Britain more reliant on imported goods. Greg Smith, MP for Mid Bucks, shared similar concerns, warning that Labour's APR changes would devastate family farms. "In my constituency, farmers are already saying they'd have to sell up to a third of their land just to meet the tax bill. That's the end of those farms. It's the end of local food production," he said, calling the policy a direct threat to the sustainability of Britain's farming communities. As the scandal around APR grows, Labour itself is showing signs of internal friction. Shadow Secretary of State for Business, Andrew Griffith, recently voiced his concerns about the inheritance tax changes, calling them a miscalculated attack on rural Britain. In an interview on the Taxpayers Alliance podcast, Griffith described Labour's approach as out of touch, arguing that family farms don't operate like corporate estates and need to be understood differently. "Family farms don't hold cash reserves like large corporations," Griffith stated. "They pass from one generation to the next, and each transfer chips away at their viability. Labour is asking these families to sacrifice land that has been in their families for hundreds of years. It's fundamentally unfair and shows a lack of understanding. Griffith's dissent highlights growing unease within Labour, suggesting that Reeves may face mounting resistance as more Labour MPs and party members question her policy. Meanwhile, Labour faces a diplomatic test across the Atlantic with the return of Donald Trump to the White House. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is now tasked with repairing the special relationship with the US amid mounting tension. Labour's harsh rhetoric against Trump in the past, including Foreign Secretary David Lammy's inflammatory comments calling him a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, has now come back to haunt them as they navigate relations with the US's unpredictable leadership. The diplomatic stakes are high, with Labour still undecided on whether to replace Britain's ambassador to the US, Dame Karen Pierce, who has navigated previous Trump relations. Insiders suggest Pierce may step down in January, but her experience with Trump's previous administration could be vital in managing relations. While names like David Miliband have been floated as potential replacements, some argue that keeping Pierce in place may ease the transition and help bridge gaps with Trump's team. As pressure mounts, Labour's Environment Secretary Steve Reed has defended the APR reforms, insisting that the changes will affect only the wealthiest farmers and are essential for funding rural services. Reed argued that only the top 1% of farmers would be affected, maintaining that the policy would create a fairer system for supporting NHS and housing projects in rural areas. But rural MPs and farming communities are unconvinced. This 1% argument doesn't reflect reality, argued Brandreth. Farms may look high value on paper, but they're cash poor. Labour's approach is totally disconnected from the way real farms operate. Many family farms can't afford to pay these new taxes without selling land or shutting down. Even Environment Secretary Steve Reed's assurances that Labour's budget allocation would fund sustainable agriculture have failed to reassure MPs like Cross and Brandreth, who see these promises as empty words that fail to address the real impact on British farming. With the mounting backlash, Rachel Reeves faces a crucial decision. Will Labour reverse course to protect family farms, or will Reeves stay the course, risking Labour's standing with rural voters and exacerbating internal tensions? Farmers and MPs are watching closely, demanding a U-turn to preserve Britain's farming heritage and prevent further loss of rural livelihoods. Labour's approach risks alienating rural communities at a time when the party is also juggling international tensions with the US. As farmers push back and Labour MPs question the impact on rural Britain, Reeves and Starmer face a high-stakes balancing act. Reeves's next moves could determine the future of Labour's relationship with Britain's rural communities, who feel increasingly sidelined by policies that don't align with their way of life. Stay tuned for the latest developments. This explosive story is far from over. To keep up with every twist, hit subscribe, give us a like, and stay tuned as we continue to follow the scandal unfolding around Labour's family farm.